Good evening. You're watching ENCA Moneyline, your money guide. My name is Sikim Gabateli. Coming up on the show tonight. Business fears higher taxes come budget day next week. The recent drought in the country could spell higher food prices. And in our Thursday night careers feature, we speak about the balance between work and play. But first, your top stories. Additional taxes will be a heavy burden on already struggling businesses. The Steel and Engineering Industries Federation of Southern Africa is worried about this and wants Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene to hold back on any increase. There are expectations that the minister will hike taxes in his crucial budget speech next week. South Africa's economy is currently grappling with a 27 billion rand revenue shortfall, and Nene is expected to turn to taxes to raise the money to plug it. SAFESA's CEO Kaizer Nyatsumba says the move will hurt all sectors, especially the metals and engineering industries. Nyatsumba says additional taxes would curb growth and hinder job creation. Sibanye Gold is the latest miner looking to cut ties with power utility Eskom. The gold producer intends to become energy independent over the next few years. It's considering a 3 billion rand investment into solar power and building its own coal-fired plants. Sibanye wants to reduce its reliance on Eskom due to inconsistent supply and increasingly expensive power. The company is now the largest gold producer in the country and has an overall power demand of 500 megawatts. Sibanye is the third best performer on the JSE this year. The price of food could be hiked if South Africa is forced to import white maize. This comes as the possibility of producing 12 million tons of maize will more than likely not be reached. Months of drought have affected crops in the northwest and parts of the Free State. Farmers say in the past 4 years there's been a lot less rain, and this past season has been the worst, especially with the extreme heat the country's been experiencing. And joining us now in our Moneyline studios to discuss this issue is Grain SA CEO Jannie de Villiers. Jannie, thanks for your time this evening. Let's start with the current status of the drought. Are things still quite bad?
Good evening. Yes, I think unfortunately I'm also the carrier of bad news. As we look at the situation at the moment, we have flown over the area last week. And we are constantly talking to farmers in the area. Currently, the northwestern part of the Free State, as well as the northwest province, is really going through a very tough time. If we look at the crops in the east, I think they can, there are good patches and bad patches. I think, if they can get some rain as well pretty soon, they might still have like a average crop. But in the west, I think we've had already some permanent damage.
Goodness, I was about to ask you if any of the damage is reversible. Should we not see any rain in the coming weeks?
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of good prospects for rain. I think you would have seen in the earlier that it's only shattered thunder showers, and I think that is not going to help us. There are farmers that I spoke to today that says they need like something like 100 millimeters, and that might just maintain the crop at its current level, and currently they're talking already about 40% losses on their sort of long-term averages.
What's the worst case scenario, Jannie, should this situation persist when it comes to food price increases then?
Yeah, I think if we don't receive rain, let's say in the next 3 weeks, or not a general rain, and I'm talking like huge millimeters, not like just 10 and 20 here and there, then I think we will probably have to import 1-2 million tons even of maize to meet our own needs, and that will push all the maize prices up to import parity, which will then bring double-digit inflation in products like poultry, eggs, dairy products, all the kind of dairy products, and especially the maize meal, I think is going to be very bad for the poor in this country, and also the meat products. So we will probably see food inflation then in a worst case scenario like that moving into double digits. It might like in 2007, we also had very high food prices, and it pulled actually the country's inflation up to the 6% level.
I understand that load shedding is also having its own impact. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's also bad for the irrigation guys. I think we produce about 20% of all our maize under irrigation, mostly yellow maize. And what happens is when the power cut gets on, they start pumping from the rivers into all the channels. And by the time the channel is full and the farmers can start pumping from the channels, then the power goes off, and then the water runs out of the channel back into the river. And so when the power gets on, there's no water in the channel. So the plants are really struggling at the moment, especially under this heat. So there are farmers even under irrigation that is getting damaged.
What sort of losses could the farming community actually face, Dani, from these kinds of losses?
Yeah, we're busy looking at what has been happening in 1992. That was the last time we had a general drought. I think 2 years ago we had a drought in Northwest. It was fairly localized, and we actually overcome that, and in the end the country had still enough maize. But in 92 we had to import huge quantities, and the same applies for countries like Zim and our Botswana, Namibia, Swaziland, Lesotho. All of those countries depend on the production in South Africa. So we are busy looking at what were the plans that they made in that time. I had some discussions even today in Durban with the port authorities, talking about the possibilities of what could happen if we have to import huge quantities of maize to make sure that the country have sufficient supplies.
What sort of lasting impact could this have? I suppose farmers who need to then finance their crops for next year might be impacted. And what about the ground itself?
Yeah, I think firstly, even if we have a lot of rain in the month of March and even April, it will help us to build up enough moisture so that we can plant next year. If there's no rain coming in March and April, and for the rest of the raining season in the north, we won't be able to plant next year, irrespective of whether we will be able to get finance. But the access to finance is always the challenging thing for the farmers. If they miss this season and they can't get all their finance sorted out, they might not be able in a position to actually plant next season. Sometimes, this sort of drought is also there to try and improve the market. Some of the guys who made bad decisions are going to be shaken out, which is always a bad thing. And I think those who are borrowing the money to the farmers, they don't need the farms. They actually want the best farmers to maintain on the land. And obviously we need to look at the research to improve the drought tolerance in our agricultural practices.
Okay. We'll leave it there. Thanks for your time today. Jannie de Villiers is CEO of Grain SA. Now, the Chief Financial Officer of SAB Miller has resigned. Jamie Wilson has cited personal reasons for his decision. Wilson has held the post since 2011 and will leave the board with immediate effect. His departure comes amid talk of a takeover by larger rival Anheuser-Busch InBev. The outgoing CFO is entitled to a payment of nearly 14 million rand for his time in office. He'll be temporarily replaced by Group Strategy Director Dominic Lorenzo. SAB Miller is the world's second largest brewing company. Well, Greece is requesting a 6-month extension to its Eurozone loan agreement. It's racing to avoid bankruptcy, and Germany may have offered an olive branch.
A 6-month loan extension, that's the formal request from Greece to its Eurozone peers. Without it, the country could run out of money within weeks. But Athens officials say the request would be on different terms to its current bailout obligations. Talks collapsed earlier this week when it rejected plans to extend the 3.2 trillion rand program. There's been fierce opposition from Germany to any relaxation in the terms.
We will do our very best to fight for what is urgently needed, but the room of maneuver is limited, and it's not only one member state.
Analysts are still optimistic that a deal will be reached.
In the Eurozone, you enter into a form of marriage, a sort of knot in which promises are made by both sides. So untying the knot requires a breach of promise by both sides.
The ECB has agreed to a modest increase in emergency funding for Greek banks, authorizing an added 43.7 billion rand in emergency cash. But the Greek central bank is said to have asked for more, raising fears that the ECB will withdraw its assistance.
Nobody expects that we're going to get to that, but it is a big risk and, of course, would pose a further threat to the lasting stability and longevity of the Eurozone.
Eurozone finance ministers will meet again on Friday in a last gasp at saving Greece.
After the break, we take a look at work-life balance. You're watching ENCA Moneyline, your money guide. Stay with us.